Welcome. Welcome to Starting Different. It's a series of webcasts, Starting Different, that I began doing in the midst of this time of disruption with friends who I believe could help. Every day in every way, we're starting different. And today I'm honored to have my dear friend, Stephen Robertson, with me. Stephen, how are you, brother?
Doing amazingly well. Thanks for having me with you, Dean.
Here is what Stephen's going to talk to us about today is Gen Z, the aliens in your home and office. They are already using tools better than us, and we can learn from them. And Steve's going to share with us what some of those tools are. He's also going to share with us a process that we can use to connect with them, both personally and in our business life. So he's going to go through 5 specific tips and a specific process to connect with them. But first, Steve, tell us, who are we talking about? When we're talking about Gen Z, what are we actually talking about?
We're talking about the youth, let's call them that, between 10 and 24, 1996 and 2010. Anybody born between that period of time, you are Gen Z.
So even Gen Z doesn't know. People think about the millennials and that was the last generation everyone talked about. Steve, would you say that this generation is significantly different than the millennials?
Fundamentally different, and that's why we joke and call them aliens. They're completely different.
And one of the things that's different about them is that this graphic up on the left, and you've created an amazing infographic for your workshops, and it's going to be in your book. So I've just taken pieces of it because we can only cover the tip of the iceberg. But this is the first generation to live in a constant state of change. And they're not only your kids, they're, for many of you, they're your employees and your customers. They're 32% of the world's population, 40% of the customers in the US. And I want to start with a bottom line upfront question. Bottom line upfront, what if there was a button that you could push in your brain to connect with the aliens, those aliens, that Gen Z in your home and office? Well, you would hit that button, I think, pretty quickly if you could. So Steve, why don't we give the audience a little background on how you and I met? You and I met, and here's a picture that looks like the version of Steve that I met. And I think we met 13 years ago. Does that seem like the right number to you?
Dean, I remember the first time we met, we were both part of a Vistage group. And for those of you that know Dean, he walked into the room, and what he brings with him is, I joke, PPC, pay per click, right? What you do with Google, you pay per click. Dean comes in, and there's a presence that he brings with him. There's no doubt about it, and that's a good thing. It's a good presence.
Wow. Well, I dug out. Go ahead, keep going. I'm loving it.
No,
keep going.
More. I want to hear the PPC. The presence was the first thing. But what I value about even to this day, Dean, is you bring such a perspective and clarity to conversations that seem complicated. And from day one, you brought that to every member of our group, and we're still friends with all of those members. And as you know,
we should mention Ned Fry, who was our Vistage chair. And for those of you who are listening who don't know, Vistage is the world's largest CEO membership organization. So this is a mug that's 13 years old. I actually, Ned and I got them together around that time. 25,000 Vistage members, CEOs around the world meet in groups each month all over the world. And they have chairs, individual chair people who run these groups. And our chair was Ned Fry. Ned Fry has since passed, but he was an amazing guy. He brought us together. Steve, if I were to ask you, of all the Vistage speakers that we had come speak to our group, who is the one that stands out for you? And you know that there's one that stands out for me, but who do you think I'm thinking of?
I love Vistage because every speaker impacted my life in a positive way. But the one I complained about before he arrived was a gentleman who changed my life. I said to Ned, why is this guy coming? His name is Joe Dillon, and he changed my life.
So Joe Dillon was late 60s, maybe early 70s when we met him, had almost no body fat, looked like the living representation of Clint Eastwood. He had trained Olympic athletes. After Joe Dillon taught us how to take care of our bodies and how to take care of ourselves through what we ate, I think the average member of our group lost 20 pounds. And I still to this day follow his workout. So we want to give Vistage a little shout out. But Steve, tell us about the title to your book. The book is called The Aliens Among Us, The Disconnected Generation. Tell us about where that title came from.
Thanks, Dean. Well, there's this saying that I adore, and it goes like this. What you see is not more real than what is true. And what we see about Gen Z
Pause.
is that
What you see is not more real than what is real. Go ahead, because it's hugely powerful. Go ahead.
So what we see this generation of teenagers going through a phase. And while we see that, what is true is that there is a generation going through a phase, being teenagers, but there's so much more. They are fundamentally different. And part of the reason this book's named like it is because I want people to understand that if they look at them through a new lens and see that they're aliens, they'll engage with them differently.
Yeah. I think Gen Z is not normal. That's clear. I think they're also extraordinary. And it's not just you and I saying it. As you were writing your manuscript, which I have in front of me, and I've read through 3 times this week and marked up. But I was reading Admiral William McRaven's book about sea stories, and I just want to point out what the person who headed up our special operations for this country, and he also headed up the University of Texas school system, said that this generation are not like any other generation. They're better. They're more inclusive. They don't see color, ethnicity, orientation. They value people for their friendship and their talents. They're more engaged. They won't stand by and watch bad things happen to good people. I mean, he's talking about what he believes is the greatest generation. And we're talking about the group that's coming on now. And you outlined some key differences, and I have them up here. So why don't you describe for us what is so different about Gen Z?
We'll start off looking at them being disconnected. 40% less face time with their friends than previous generations. So on the one hand, completely disconnected. On the other hand, most connected, completely connected. Not only with their friends from school and their peers in the neighborhood, but their peers around the world, and spending more than 10 hours a day on consuming online content. On the other side, they're growing up fast because content is really mature, and so it's maturing them really quickly. They're growing up very fast because they have access to everything. But on the other hand, growing up really slow. 48% of them say that their soft skills and that interpersonal connection is something they're weak at. Most anxious. We're talking about an increase of 59% in anxiety, depression, and suicide in this generation compared to the one before. But yet, data will show us we're living in the safest time in recorded human history. It's incredible. And as you know, we spoke about this going through 2008 crash and the things that we've gone through fiscally. This is a conservative group that are saving, planning for retirement when some millennials aren't even doing that yet. So their perspective is very different. And of course, living in some of the richest, well, certainly the richest country in the world, and they have this creativity that knows no bounds.
It strikes me that there's this incredible dichotomy, and all of it is about disruption. In fact, as I started drawing this out, if we go back and forth like this, we actually see why Z might be the perfect letter to have described this amazing generation. I mean, they never experienced a world without the internet. In fact, they never experienced a world that most of them can't remember a world without an iPhone. They never experienced a world that wasn't at war in terms of terrorism. They never experienced a world without school shootings. So they really are a unique and I think uniquely well-suited generation to live in the times of disruptions that we're in. I actually think that there's a lot that we can learn from them. So we've talked about the what. Now the why clearly is that these folks are your customers, they're your employees, and if you have tools that you can use to connect with them, and that's really, we're going to get into the heart right now. What tools would Steve and I set the table with? And one of the things I consider myself, because I do see things a little differently than most people, I actually consider myself a tool creator. I actually try to look for patterns, I look for cues, I look for shortcuts that I can share in my training courses, and I think one of my contributions to the world is the ability to come up with those tools. And first thing I want to set the table with, and Steve, I want you thinking about the quote from Malcolm Gladwell, but the first thing I want to set the table with, if you will, are these three little buckets. There is a concept in brain science called perceptual contrast. And it says, I can change your perception of anything based on what I give you to feel before that thing. So we have three buckets. If I were to tell you that the middle bucket is full of room temperature water, the bucket on the left is full of ice water, and the bucket on your right is full of hot water. And I now put one of your hands in the ice bucket and one of your hands in the hot bucket. I take them both out and I put them in the room temperature bucket. The hand that had started in the ice will feel this middle bucket as warm. The hand that had started in the heat will feel this middle bucket as cold. So depending on how we come at something, that will determine what we feel about it. And Steve, I asked you to read this week because I thought it would help us in this. I asked you to read the book, Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. And there was something that jumped out for both of us. There was a comment in the book. What do you recall about that comment?
Well, what I loved about the book was it summed up something that I've said, unfortunately, to myself. When I'm driving, everybody that drives faster than I do is a maniac, complete maniac. And everybody that drives slower than me is an absolute idiot. And I realized what you've just described, and Malcolm speaks about in that book, is this perception frames everything.
So we have a perception about Generation X, and a couple of things that Steve has pointed out is that our perception is based on where we're coming from. So Steve's going to go through 5 specific tips for you to think about, and specifically 5 tools that you can apply. He's going to talk about an 8-second filter, what that means. He's going to talk about a curated stream. By the way, those are 2 tools that Generation Z is already using better than you. And then we're going to talk about 3 new tools, something called mutually uncommon ground, a relationship GPS, and how to take the dis out of disconnect. So let's start in the good news, bad news. Steve, let's start into the tips. 8-second filter. You got it. What's it mean and why is it important?
The 8-second filter is a skill that Gen Z are refining daily. It's the skill that they use to choose what they are going to pay attention to and allow into their lives on a daily basis. It's a tool that they use to filter the mass of communication and information that's coming at them on a daily basis.
So it's actually a survival mechanism for them.
Absolutely. It's a tool to get through every single day. And that filter filters out everything that they don't want in and allows them, when they find something that they want into that they filter in, it allows them to deep dive and become experts, fall in love with. And so it's a really interesting process that they go through. The negative part of it is if that filter filters you out, it's very hard to get back in.
So first of all, we think they have a short attention span, and you make the point of differentiating. Tell us how an 8-second filter is different from an attention span.
Yeah, the attention span, I saw some study that the goldfish has a 3-second attention span. And so 8-second attention span just doesn't seem right for this generation. It's not about attention. It's about survival, and it's about choosing what it is you want to focus on. There's a massive difference there. They don't have the lack of focusing. They have the ability to deep dive when they really love something.
And it's interesting because of that, they probably are better at saying no to things than we are. Warren Buffett says the difference between successful people and very successful people is that very successful people say no to almost everything. And I think because of this 8-second filter, Generation Z does a better job than most of us saying no to things that aren't important to them. So number one thing, consider this 8-second filter and how you can get better at filtering your world and getting in through their filter. And we'll talk about how you do that with number 2. Steve, the concept is a curated stream. Tell us about this word stream, what it means, and also the word curated, what you mean by that.
The curated stream comes directly after the filter. Once you have been filtered and you are in someone's life. You have the ability to influence them, speak into their lives, share content with them. You are what I call in their curated stream. Their stream is the consciousness and the subconsciousness of everything that goes on in their day-to-day life. But the curation
So a
is saying
stream is
what's
information
in,
that
what's
comes
out.
to them. Information that comes to them, whether it's through Facebook or whether it's through Instagram or whether it's through the regular media or whether it's through their school or their job. These are the streams that are coming into them. That's what you're referring to.
100%, even their peers. So it doesn't have to be digital, but it certainly is. And their parents, by the way, and leaders in the office. The curation is when you understand curation, you realize that the filter, the yes and the no that you spoke about earlier, Dean, they are saying yes and or no to you. And if you get a yes, you have the ability to speak into their lives. If you have a no, you don't, even as a parent or a leader. So this curated stream, once you understand it, is so important in not only understanding what it is, but how to get into it so that you can influence and guide these people well.
If you're not in that stream, you're not in their stream of consciousness, right? So
Absolutely.
first tip, 8-second filter allows them to filter things out and decide what's going to go into their stream. Talk to us about this concept you have of mutually uncommon ground. So first of all, where did this term come to you from? Do you remember where it came to you from?
Yeah, Dean, I do. A few years ago, I was asked to speak in the Netherlands, and I was part of the conversation where I was trying to explain to people that there is a very easy, good, effective, efficient way to get into someone's curated stream. And I was trying to explain to them this concept, and a gentleman by the name of Yaku Smith, who's since become a really close friend of mine, said, "You mean we need to find mutual, uncommon ground to begin this conversation?" I said, "That's it. I'm going to be using that going forward."
Well, and when I saw mutual uncommon ground, of course, I'm looking for a shortcut. So I'm thinking the word mug, and I'm thinking, wouldn't it be amazing if you started with the end in mind? If you wanted to connect with someone in Generation Z, think about what are the mug shots that you would have at how the time of you going after these mutually uncommon things could produce actual physical pictures. Here's a mugshot from around the time Steve and I first met. That's my daughter,
Right.
Devin. Folks know I call her Birdie, and there she is at 5 or 6 years old when I had decided to fight for shared custody, and that literally immersed me every other week full time in this amazing world of what it meant to be Gen Z. And for us, the mutually uncommon ground has been music. Here's us in Nashville this is a mugshot from Nashville at Jack White's studio. And here we went to Amsterdam to see a musician in concert. Here's us at the Barricade. But these are all mugshots. Now, Steve, what are some examples you can give folks who, may not be the music fan that I am? What are some examples you can give folks of mutually uncommon ground?
Well, let me just say this, Dean. We live in an Instagram world, and the fact that you have these representations to show of times where you and Devin connected, that is beautiful. So if you can think about it as an Instagram moment, a moment that they would love to share, you would love to share and remember, that's a great place to begin. The creativity is up to you as a parent. Do anything.
So it might be cooking, it might be going to museums,
Absolutely.
It might be anything. But it's mutually uncommon ground. Okay, that's an awesome tip. Fourth tip, we've talked about the filter, the stream, mugshots. Talk to us about a relationship GPS, and specifically, you and I talked about, you brought up the comment of not a sage on stage. They're looking for a guide by their side. Tell us what you see as the difference and why it's so important for this generation to have a guide.
The Industrial Revolution brought stage-on-stage style learning. Sage standing up front, telling you what to do so that you knew how to do that. We are in a new era completely. And because of technology, not only Gen Z, but every generation has access to the knowledge to do just about anything they want. They don't need somebody to do that. But what they do need is they need somebody to come alongside them. And the guide that's positioned by your side, the concept of a GPS, not only telling you where to go, but how to get there, is so beautiful, because that's what this generation needs. They don't necessarily know they don't need to know what to do. They need to know how to do that. So let me say it in a little bit of a better way. I heard this comment about the difference between coaching, what you do, and mentoring, who you are. And the guide positioned by your side is uniquely positioned to help you become who you need to be. It's not so much about what you do. And I love this idea of the GPS guiding you not only to a journey, but telling you how to to a destination, but telling you how to get there.
Well, and there are some very unique qualifications that you have that make you extremely well positioned to be a guide for the rest of us, and certainly businesses out there who are looking to take this out of disconnect and connect with this generation. And in fact, you and I in our thinking this week, and this was really your thinking around creating a model, a process, which we're now referring to as a deliberate influence stream. And if there's any tool that I would like us to spend the most time on here today, and we're at about the 20-minute mark, which means we can really take our time with this next slide, Steve, talk to us about this concept in each of these words, deliberate influence stream, and the model that you have put together, which you'd like to share with businesses.
Thank you, Dean. Yeah, Dean, you and I spent a lot of time unpacking this, and it's been an amazing journey. For a number of years, we have seen probably 70,000 kids in this space over the years, Gen Z, and
let me stop there and let people know you ran one of the most successful summer camp and student enhancement programs in the world. In fact, well over 115,000 students have come through and thousands of camp counselors. And in the last few years, all of them are Generation Z. So folks, I want you to understand the perspective. Now, in this camp, you may not have spoke to people directly about these components. You actually had a concept, Steve, that you would talk to parents about, and the concept is an invisible curriculum. Tell the audience what that means.
Students would be with us to learn all sorts of skills, but what we've identified, even in this conversation, you'd be aware of it, is that there are a number of things that are areas that Gen Z really needs to grow in. And those are typically the areas of soft skills. They are good at skill acquisition, but the soft skills that all of us understand are so important, are in deficit for them. And so what we've done in every curriculum, whether it be tennis or cooking or business or robotics, it doesn't matter, or medicine, we've figured out how to share 3 soft skills that we believe will help future-proof these children, Gen Z, for their futures. Communication, the number one. 35% of their communication currently is digital. And so communication is not just talking, it's listening and it's processing information. So we build that in so that without them knowing, we're working and growing their communication skills. We do the same with number 2, which I loved your insights on that, by the way, in the problem-solving space. And the third area is resilience, or some people like to call it grit. That invisible curriculum we hide in every conversation. And as a parent or a leader, you have to understand that imparting this well through your hiring process, your mentoring process, your training process, any of those processes, this is critical that these 3, and these aren't the only 3, but these are 3 of the great ones to begin, places to begin, gives you the ability to guide them. And we call it guided autonomy, where you're guiding them through this process.
Well, and I think in the absence of a deliberate stream of influence, this stuff doesn't happen. I can give you examples of kids I know who are my daughter's age who do not have the communication skills she has, who do not have the problem-solving skills. So this deliberate is really important, because in the absence of this generation isn't going to tell you they need these things. They think they already know them. And they've become so good. Let me just give you an example. They've become so good at using other people's brains for problem solving. There was a moment recently with Devin's mother and I where I said to Devin's mom, I said, we need to take a step back and encourage her to stop using our brains, because Devin is really, really smart. And what I realized is there was things she could solve herself, but she was using our brain to solve them. So there's a tool I shared with you as we were laughing about this, a tool I actually learned from a Vistage chair. They were processing an issue in a group, and the member whose issue was being processed, the chair asked, "What do you think you should do?" And the member said, "I have no idea." And the chair then asked this question, "But if you did have an idea, what would it look like?" And that is what we're talking about when we're talking about a guided autonomy. We're talking about pushing it back on them, letting them develop it, letting them develop these skills. Steve, would you want to talk any further about either communication skills, problem solving, or resilience? Maybe for a moment, why do you think this one is one that needs to be talked about? I have my own thoughts, but why do you think resilience is one that this audience needs to hear about?
I want to touch on two quick things. Resilience, in this instant on-demand world, you can eat when you want, you can watch when you want. Resilience is just not being grown in the same way as it has, and it is such a critical part of what everybody needs.
And think about video games. They can be experts the moment they pick it up. They're driving a race car in Le Mans. They're riding a motorcycle. They're flying a plane. They are used to things taking time to develop. Agreed?
That's correct. Absolutely. And I just wanted to share one thing on deliberate and why deliberate is so important in this deliberate and influence. Deliberate, actually, there was a gentleman, Bruce Tolgan, he's in a Vistage group. You've probably come across him. He writes a whole lot of things, and he speaks about an epidemic of undermanagement. And why deliberate is so important is there's an epidemic of undermanagement in the home and in the workplace. And unless you take deliberate action, the chances of you influencing this generation well is almost zero. Why the invisible stuff is important is because it's a way to do it without getting in someone's face. It's a way to grow them in areas we know that they need to be strong. So I just wanted to add that.
I know you have a 3-hour version of this talk, and I know you've created checklists for companies that they can use for their hiring process, for their onboarding process, and those all things that people can follow up with you. Steve, are you okay with people following up, emailing you? And here's your info at stephenjrobertson.com. Would that be okay with you?
Oh, I would love that. Thank you, Dean.
And Steve, before I get to my last slide, is there anything you think we left out? Because we're at just about the 30-minute mark now, a few minutes before the 30-minute mark. Is there anything you left out? Now, again, what I'm creating with this series is, if you will, a forcing mechanism to create forward motion. This is a starting button, a button. It's something you can push to get started. You talked about the idea of starting small, micro mentorship. You want to, that's not something that came up in this conversation, but would you like to share a little bit about what you meant?
Thanks, Dean. And Dean's correct. We need to take just a small step, a micro action, a micro movement forward. And the invisible curriculum is a great way to begin. I think this hopefully has just given you a new lens just to realize that Gen Z are aliens, and they're going to require a different version of engagement if we're going to be part of calling them to the greatest version of who they can be. And they're going to be amazing. We can be part of that. And so to future-proof them, I think take a small step. Do something to create a mugshot. Do find some mutual uncommon ground today and start to build that opportunity to get into the curated stream, because that's what it's about. And it's not just about at home, it's in the workplace too. So it's a really important conversation that we have to have now.
One of the things that is unique, we may think about this generation, it's not unique at all. It's actually ancient. This idea of them being constantly in a state of becoming. It was written about in the 5th century BC. My favorite work of art is this statue, and I end every presentation with it. Steve, you've seen it for 20 years, or the 13 years you've known me, but I've had the statue for 20 years. It's called Self-Made Man, and I originally would think that this man was carving himself. I actually see him now as being in the process of becoming. And I think that's what's happening with all of us right now during this time of disruption, right? I think we're going to look back at this and realize it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, but it was what we made of it. So Stephen, I am going to put the video of this up on YouTube for everyone to see. The videos are already there from my friend, Dr. Bill Crawford. I had him on first. I had our mutual friend, Michael Olasso, on after that. 2 weeks ago, Cujo, F-15, F-22 fighter pilot talking about debriefing the way the Air Force does. Bill Woodich, my friend, talking about failing more. I had you this week. Next week, I have an individual who's going to teach us how to start different with 6,000 people. We're going to talk about how you make the invisible visible for a large organization. So Steve, I'll put my email address up here for everyone, and I'm waving goodbye to you, brother, and I'll end with the sunshot. Stephen, it was my pleasure having you on today. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you, Dean.
Cheers, buddy.